Growing up in Texas, I always thought I'd live a simple life. Church on Sundays, BBQs with the family, and maybe even a little league coach someday. But life doesn't always go as planned, especially when you're born into a family with deep military roots. My father served, my grandfather served, and by the time I graduated high school, there wasn't much question about what I'd do next. Joining the Air Force felt natural, and I loved my job. But it came with sacrifices, long deployments, and the strain of being away from home. I met Maria just after completing basic training. She was a firecracker, full of energy and charm, the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laugh. We got married young, maybe too young, but it felt right. We had Sean a year later, and life seemed perfect. When I was deployed to Afghanistan, Maria held down the fort back in Texas. At least, that's what I believed. Letters from her were full of updates about Sean's milestones, his first steps, first words. I lived for those updates, even if the pictures sometimes arrived late or with a rushed note attached. Still, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Sometimes her tone in our calls felt distant. I chalked it up to stress. Raising a kid while I was thousands of miles away couldn't have been easy. I wanted to believe that everything was fine. After all, Maria always reassured me she could handle anything. The night before my deployment, Maria kissed me goodbye at the airport, whispering, "I'll wait for you." Her eyes looked so sincere. I'd carry that moment with me through countless missions, drawing strength from the promise that no matter what, I had someone waiting for me back home. But promises, I would soon learn, are sometimes just words. My first clue that something was wrong came in the form of a photograph. I was on leave, staying with Maria and Sean at our house in San Antonio. I had been looking for an old toolbox in the garage when I stumbled across a shoebox tucked away in a dusty corner. Inside, I found some photos. Nothing unusual at first. There were pictures of Maria and Sean at the park, a few candid shots of her with our friends. But then I saw one that stopped me cold. It was Maria, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, sitting too close to a man I didn't recognize. His hand rested casually on her shoulder, and the familiarity in their posture sent my mind racing. The back of the photo had a date scribbled on it, a date that lined up with one of my deployments. When I asked Maria about the picture that evening, she laughed it off. "Oh, that's just Mark," she said. "He's a friend of Jenny's husband. He came along to one of our cookouts. I forgot we even took that picture." She brushed it off so casually that I almost believed her. Almost. But something about her tone didn't sit right. She was too quick to dismiss it, her smile a little too forced. A week later, I found a receipt in her purse from a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to go on anniversaries. The receipt wasn't from an anniversary or any special occasion I could remember. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes. "I went with Jenny and her husband," she said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "Andrew, you're being paranoid." But was I? My gut told me otherwise. I had seen her scrolling through her phone late at night, smiling at texts she wouldn't share. She'd been spending more time helping out a friend from work, or staying late for office events. The final straw came when I noticed her being overly protective of her phone. One evening, she left it on the kitchen counter to grab Sean from his playpen. A notification popped up, a message preview from someone named Mark. "Miss you. When can I see you again?" I froze. The casual way he spoke, like they were something more than friends, made my stomach twist. Maria returned and snatched her phone so quickly it only confirmed my fears. I asked her who Mark was, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. Her response was defensive. "Are you seriously snooping on my phone now? Mark is just someone from work. We've been working on a project together. Stop trying to create problems where there aren't any." But I wasn't creating problems. The problems were already there, and her excuses were starting to sound like lies. That night, as she slept, I sat on the couch staring at the family photos on the mantel. My heart felt heavy with doubt. How could the woman I trusted with my life, the mother of my child, keep something like this from me? I knew I needed the truth, but the truth would come at a cost. Little did I know, it was only the beginning. After that night, I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion in my chest. Maria's behavior grew stranger by the day. She was distant, distracted, and quick to snap at me over the smallest things. Every time I asked her about her day, I got vague answers or deflections. It was like she was trying to keep me from seeing something right in front of my face. I decided to stop asking and start observing. One evening, when she went out claiming to meet Jenny for drinks, I asked my mom to watch Sean and followed her. It felt wrong, like I was violating the trust we were supposed to have as husband and wife. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Sure enough, Maria wasn't with Jenny. She was at a restaurant downtown, sitting across from a man I assumed was Mark. They weren't just talking. The way she leaned toward him, touching his arm, laughing at something he said, it was like watching someone else entirely. My Maria wasn't supposed to smile at another man like that. I didn't confront her then. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to storm in, demand an explanation, and let the world know how wrong it all was. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, held back. I wanted to give her a chance to come clean. That chance came later that night. When she got home, I asked her how her evening went. She didn't even hesitate. "Oh, it was fine," she said, taking off her heels. "Jenny and I had a good time catching up." That lie was the last straw. "Are you sure about that, Maria?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She froze for a second, her hands hovering over the clasp of her necklace. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know you weren't with Jenny," I said, my heart pounding. "I saw you, Maria. I saw you with him." Her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "You followed me. Andrew, that's insane. You've completely lost it." "No, Maria," I shot back. "You're the one who's lost it. You've been lying to me for months. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I wouldn't notice?" She opened her mouth to respond, but then stopped. For a brief moment, her eyes softened, and I thought she might finally tell me the truth. But instead, she doubled down. "Mark is just a friend. We were talking about work, nothing else. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Don't lie to me again," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I saw how you looked at him. I know this isn't just about work." Her face hardened. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, we've been spending time together. But it's nothing like what you're thinking. You're paranoid, Andrew. Maybe if you weren't gone all the time, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for someone to talk to." Her words cut deeper than I expected. The way she shifted the blame onto me, like I was the reason for her betrayal, made my chest ache. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to make her see how much she was hurting me. But instead, I just stared at her, stunned into silence. "I'm done with this conversation," she said, turning away. "You can either get over your insecurities, or we're going to have a problem." As she walked up the stairs, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, sadness, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. For the first time, I realized the woman I had built my life around, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was a stranger. The days that followed felt like living in a fog. Maria's betrayal consumed my thoughts, clouding everything else in my life. I tried to focus on Sean, on keeping things as normal as possible for his sake, but every time I looked at him, I thought about what this was doing to our family. How did we get here? What had I missed along the way? Maria acted as though nothing had changed. She still went about her routine, cooking dinner, playing with Sean, scrolling through her phone in the evenings like she didn't have a care in the world. It was infuriating. She didn't even seem guilty, not really. If anything, she looked annoyed whenever I brought up what had happened. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Sean had just gone to bed, and Maria was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I stood in the doorway, watching her, and felt something in me snap. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and firm. Maria didn't even look up. "Not this again, Andrew. I told you, there's nothing going on. Stop lying to me." I snapped, louder than I intended. She jumped, finally meeting my gaze, her expression shifting from annoyance to anger. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, throwing her phone onto the coffee table. "I've already explained everything. You're the one who won't let it go." Because it doesn't make sense, Maria. I shot back. None of this makes sense. Why are you still talking to him? Why do you keep defending yourself instead of apologizing? She stood, crossing her arms. I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. You're the one blowing this out of proportion, Andrew. You're the one who can't handle the fact that I have a life outside of you. Her words hit like a slap. A life outside of me? I repeated. Maria, you're my wife. You're supposed to share your life with me, not some other guy. Oh, so I'm just supposed to sit here and wait for you to come home from deployment like a good little wife. Is that it? She said bitterly. Do you know how lonely it gets? Do you know what it's like to raise a kid on your own, to go to bed every night wondering if your husband's even alive? Don't you dare, I said, my voice shaking. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. I've done everything I could to support this family. I've sacrificed so much, and this is how you repay me. Maria laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You think you're some kind of martyr, don't you? Like you're the only one who's ever made sacrifices. Well, newsflash, Andrew, I've sacrificed too. I gave up my career, my dreams, to be your wife. But none of that matters to you. All you care about is what I've done wrong. Her words stung, but I couldn't let her twist the truth. This isn't about your sacrifices or mine. This is about the fact that you betrayed me, Maria. You lied to me, and you broke our vows. How am I supposed to trust you after that? Maria's face softened, just for a moment, and I thought she might finally see reason. But then she shook her head, her expression hardening again. I can't do this with you, Andrew. I can't keep living under your microscope, constantly defending myself. If you can't move past this, then maybe we're better off apart. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Was she really suggesting we end our marriage? The thought of losing her, of losing Sean, was almost unbearable. But the thought of staying in a marriage built on lies was worse. Maybe you're right, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Maybe we are better off apart. Maria looked startled, like she hadn't expected me to agree. Andrew, I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant, I interrupted, my voice firm. I'm done pretending everything's okay. I'm done letting you walk all over me. If you can't be honest with me, then there's no point in us staying together. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, Maria sighed, her shoulders slumping. What do you want me to say, Andrew? That I made a mistake? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Her apology felt hollow, like she was only saying it to placate me. But it was enough to make me realize I couldn't keep living like this. I had to think about Sean, about what kind of example I was setting for him. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Maria didn't fight me on the divorce, at least not at first. But as the weeks went on, she started playing dirty, showing up late for custody exchanges, accusing me of being a neglectful father, even questioning whether I was fit to raise Sean on my own. It was like she couldn't stand the idea of me moving on without her. Through it all, I leaned on my family and my closest friend, Joseph Cassini. They were my lifeline, reminding me that I was strong enough to get through this. For Sean's sake, I had to be. This wasn't just about my pain or Maria's betrayal. This was about building a life where my son could thrive, even if it meant starting over from scratch. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Maria's lies define me. The weeks after I filed for divorce were some of the hardest I'd ever endured. It wasn't the kind of pain you could patch up with stitches or ease with a strong drink. It was deeper than that, the kind of hurt that lingered in quiet moments when the house was too still, and the only thing keeping me company was my own thoughts. Maria didn't make it easy. She seemed determined to paint herself as the victim. Every time we exchanged Sean, she had some snide comment or accusation to throw my way. She even tried to twist things in court, saying my deployments made me an absentee father. It was a low blow, but I'd come to expect nothing less from her by then. Through all of it, Joseph Cassini was my anchor. We'd served together on more missions than I could count, And if there was one person who understood how to keep their head when the world felt like it was falling apart, it was him. Joseph wasn't the type to offer flowery words of comfort, but he didn't need to. Just having him around, sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, listening as I vented, was enough. "You're better off without her," he said one night as we watched the sunset from the back deck. "She's toxic, man. You deserve better." I don't know how to move on," I admitted, staring at the horizon. "Everything feels like it's in pieces." Joseph nodded, taking a long sip of his beer before replying. "One piece at a time, brother. That's how you rebuild. Start with what matters most, Sean. The rest will fall into place." And he was right. Sean became my focus, my reason for getting out of bed every morning. I threw myself into being the best father I could be, picking him up from daycare, helping him with homework, and teaching him how to ride his bike in the park near our new place. His laughter became my lifeline, a reminder that not everything in my world was broken. My family, too, rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. My parents, who'd always been a little reserved, showed up every weekend to help out. My sister, Rachel, called me almost daily to check in, her voice full of encouragement. It reminded me that even when life felt like it was unraveling, I wasn't facing it alone. But rebuilding wasn't just about leaning on others, it was about rediscovering myself. After years of defining my life around Maria and my career, I realized I needed something just for me. That's when I decided to finally pursue a dream I'd put on hold for too long: starting my own business. I'd always loved working with my hands, fixing things, and building from scratch. So I started small, repairing furniture, restoring old tools, and selling them at local markets. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a sense of purpose. Every time I finished a project, it felt like I was piecing myself back together, one nail and plank at a time. Then there was Lillian. I met her at a veteran support group Joseph dragged me to, insisting I needed to get out more. At first, I wasn't sure about her. She was sharp-tongued and direct, the kind of person who didn't shy away from speaking her mind. But there was something about her that drew me in: her strength, her resilience, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. We started talking after one of the meetings, sharing stories about our time in the service and the challenges of transitioning back to civilian life. She was stationed stateside now, working as a logistics officer, but her dedication to her job reminded me of why I joined the Air Force in the first place. "You've been through the ringer," she said one night as we sat in a diner after a meeting, nursing cups of coffee. "But you're still standing. That says a lot." "Barely," I said with a wry smile. "Some days, it feels like I'm just holding on by a thread." "Threads are stronger than you think," she replied, her eyes steady. "And you don't have to hold on alone." Her words stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together, meeting for coffee, going on hikes, and even attending Sean's Little League games. She didn't try to fix me or offer unsolicited advice. She just listened, her presence steady and grounding. For the first time in a long time, I started to feel like I could breathe again. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the weight of everything threatened to pull me under. But with Sean, my family, Joseph, and Lillian by my side, I began to see a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the wake of betrayal and heartbreak, life had a way of moving forward. One piece at a time. Just when I thought I was finding my footing, life had one more punch to throw. It came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Sean was eating cereal at the kitchen table, laughing at the cartoon playing on the tablet in front of him, while I was on the phone with my lawyer, finalizing the details of the divorce. Everything felt manageable, almost normal. Then Maria called. I hesitated before answering. Our conversations lately had been clipped and hostile, so I wasn't in the mood to hear whatever new accusation or demand she had cooked up. Still, for Sean's sake, I picked up. "What do you want, Maria?" I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Her voice, however, wasn't angry. It was panicked. "Andrew, I need to talk to you. In person." I sighed, rubbing my temple. "I don't have time for games, Maria. Just say whatever you need to say." "No," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It has to be in person. Please. Andrew. It's about Sean." Those words hit me like a gut punch. What about Sean? Is he okay? He's fine, she said quickly. But it's complicated. Can you come over tonight? Reluctantly, I agreed. I didn't know what she was playing at, but if it involved Sean, I needed to know. I spent the rest of the day with a knot in my stomach, dreading whatever revelation was waiting for me. When I arrived at Maria's place, she opened the door before I could knock. Her face was pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. It was a stark contrast to the confident, manipulative Maria I'd been dealing with for months. She ushered me inside without a word and sat down at the dining table, motioning for me to do the same. "What's this about?" I asked, my patience already wearing thin. She hesitated, wringing her hands. I did something terrible, Andrew. And you need to know the truth. I braced myself, my heart pounding. What truth? Maria took a shaky breath. When I got pregnant with Sean, I wasn't sure if he was yours. Her words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I stared at her, my mind racing. What are you saying, Maria? I didn't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I swear, I didn't know. Mark and it was a mistake. But I couldn't bring myself to tell you. And when you stepped up, when you wanted to be a family, I thought. You thought what? I interrupted, my voice rising. That I wouldn't find out? That it didn't matter? I thought it was the right thing to do, she cried. For Sean, for us. I thought I could bury it and move on. I sat back, stunned. My entire life with Sean, every bedtime story, every soccer game, every scraped knee, flashed through my mind. And now, Maria was telling me it might all be a lie? Have you done a test? I asked finally, my voice cold. She shook her head. No. I couldn't bring myself to. But if you want one. Damn right I want one, I said, standing abruptly. This isn't just about you, Maria. This is about Sean. He deserves to know the truth. The next few days were a blur of anger, fear, and waiting. I scheduled the DNA test immediately, but the results wouldn't come for a week. Every time I looked at Sean, my heart ached. He was my boy, no matter what the test said. But the thought of Maria's lies ripping apart our bond was unbearable. When the results finally came in, I could barely bring myself to open the envelope. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper, my breath catching in my throat. The words blurred together until I found the one thing I was searching for. 99.9% probability of paternity. Sean was mine. The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly followed by a surge of rage. Maria had let me question my relationship with my son, all because she couldn't face the truth. I drove to her house, the envelope in hand, and confronted her. Sean is mine, I said, tossing the results onto the table. You had no right to make me doubt that. Maria looked at the paper, her face crumpling with a mix of relief and guilt. I'm sorry, Andrew. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. You don't get to be scared, I snapped. You don't get to put me through this, to put Sean through this, just because you couldn't handle the truth. She tried to respond, but I was done listening. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of clarity. Sean was my son, and I wasn't going to let Maria's lies take that away from me. Walking out of her house that night, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was painful, but it also gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Sean needed me, and I wasn't going to let anything, not Maria, not her lies, come between us again. The moment I stepped out of Maria's house with that DNA test clutched in my hand, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Sean was mine. There was no longer any doubt about that. It was a small victory in the chaos of everything that had happened, but it was enough to keep me going. For the first time in months, I could look toward the future without feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. I threw myself into creating a stable life for Sean. The small repair business I had started began to pick up momentum, thanks to word of mouth and a little hustle on my part. I took on extra jobs, repairing everything from antique furniture to busted appliances, and even landed a contract with a local restaurant to refurbish their seating. It felt good to be productive, to build something with my own two hands. But as much as I focused on work and Sean, there was a part of me that still felt like it was missing something. That emptiness had been gnawing at me since Maria's betrayal, and no amount of sanding wood or tightening bolts could fill it. That's when Lillian came back into the picture. She showed up at one of Sean's Little League games. I hadn't seen her in a few weeks, and her appearance caught me off guard. She stood at the edge of the field, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket, looking out at the game with a small smile. When she spotted me, she waved and walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said, surprised but pleased. "I was in the area and thought I'd check out the game," she replied. "Besides, you've been dodging my texts." I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling a little guilty. "Sorry about that. Things have been complicated." Lillian nodded, her expression softening. "Yeah, I figured. But you don't have to go through it alone, you know." We ended up talking for the rest of the game, and something about her presence made the weight on my shoulders feel just a little lighter. Lillian didn't push me to open up, but she listened when I did, her quiet understanding giving me a sense of comfort I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together. She came over for dinner a couple of times, bringing Sean a set of toy planes he couldn't stop playing with. One weekend, she invited us on a hike at a nearby nature reserve. Sean was thrilled to explore the trails, and watching him run ahead with that big grin on his face made me realize how much happiness had been missing from our lives. It wasn't just Sean who seemed to be thriving with Lillian around. I found myself smiling more, laughing at her quick wit, and looking forward to her texts or calls. There was something about her strength, her honesty, the way she didn't try to fix me but supported me in finding my own way, that drew me in. One evening, after Sean had gone to bed, Lillian and I sat on the back porch, watching the stars. The conversation drifted from light topics to deeper ones, and before I knew it, I was telling her things I hadn't shared with anyone else, about how much Maria's betrayal had shaken my confidence, about the doubts I had about my ability to be the father Sean needed. Lillian listened quietly, her eyes steady as I spoke. When I finished, she reached out and placed a hand on mine. "Andrew, you're one of the strongest people I know. What you've been through would have broken a lot of people, but you're still standing. And Sean, he's lucky to have you as his dad." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I turned to look at her, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Without thinking, I leaned in, and she met me halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative, but it felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. When we pulled back, Lillian smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, her tone light but her eyes warm. "Yeah," I admitted, smiling back. "But it felt right." From that moment on, things began to shift. Lillian and I started dating, slowly building something that felt strong and real. She wasn't Maria, and that was exactly what I needed. She was honest and supportive, with no games or hidden agendas. She became someone I could rely on, someone I trusted not just with my heart but with Sean's too. Sean adored her, and the three of us started to feel like a family. For the first time since Maria's betrayal, I allowed myself to hope, not just for myself, but for the life I could build with Sean and Lillian. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was one I could be proud of. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching Sean and Lillian toss a frisbee in the yard, I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. I wasn't broken anymore. I was rebuilding, and I knew I had the strength to keep moving forward. A year after my world had fallen apart, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd be, content. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was good. Sean was thriving, my business was steadily growing, and Lillian had become an irreplaceable part of our lives. The scars from Maria's betrayal were still there, but they didn't sting as much anymore. They had become reminders of how far I'd come. The divorce was finalized, and though Maria tried to make things difficult toward the end, I kept my focus on what mattered, Sean. She still had visitation rights, and I made sure Sean had the chance to see his mother, but I no longer let her manipulate me. I kept our interactions civil but distant. My days of letting her control my emotions were over. One evening, as Sean and I were going through his bedtime routine, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, Do you think families can change? I paused, sitting on the edge of his bed. What do you mean, buddy? He shrugged, fiddling with the edge of his blanket. Like, can they get better? Even if bad things happen. Looking into his big, innocent eyes, I felt a lump in my throat. Yeah, Sean, I said, my voice steady. Families can change. They can get better. It just takes love, hard work, and the right people in your life. He nodded thoughtfully, then smiled. Like you and Lillian? I chuckled, ruffling his hair. Yeah, like me and Lillian. After tucking him in and turning off the light, I lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching him drift off to sleep. He was my reason for everything. For staying strong, for pushing forward, for believing that better days were possible. And he was right. Families could change, and ours had. Lillian and I had grown closer over the months, building a relationship rooted in trust and mutual respect. She never tried to step into Maria's role in Sean's life, but she loved him in her own way, helping him with homework, cheering him on at games, and teaching him silly card tricks that made him laugh until his stomach hurt. Watching them together filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. On a chilly fall afternoon, we took Sean to the park for a picnic. The leaves were turning shades of gold and crimson, the air crisp and filled with the scent of autumn. As Sean ran ahead, chasing a kite we'd brought along, Lillian and I sat on a blanket, watching him with matching smiles. This is nice, she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. Feels like everything's finally falling into place. It does, I agreed, wrapping an arm around her. And I wouldn't have made it here without you. She tilted her head to look at me, her eyes soft. You've always had it in you, Andrew. I just reminded you. I reached into my pocket, my heart pounding. Well, I think it's time I made it official. Lillian's eyes widened as I pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. Lillian, you've been my rock through the hardest time of my life. You've shown me what it means to trust again, to love again. I don't want to go through another day without knowing you're by my side. For me, for Sean, for us. Will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded, a smile breaking across her face. Yes, she whispered. Of course, yes. Sean ran over at that moment, his kite forgotten, and tackled us in a hug. What's going on? He asked, his face scrunched in curiosity. I just asked Lillian to marry me, I said, pulling him into my lap. What do you think about that? His face lit up. Does that mean she's gonna be my stepmom? If that's okay with you, Lillian said, her voice gentle. Sean grinned. Okay. That's awesome. As the three of us sat there, tangled in a messy, happy hug, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Life had thrown me curveballs, tested me in ways I never expected, but I had come out stronger. My family wasn't the one I had imagined, but it was better than I could have hoped for. It was filled with love, trust, and hope for the future. Looking out at the horizon, I knew this was just the beginning. Together, we'd build a life that honored the lessons of the past while embracing the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living.